Welcome to the Progression Health podcast. This is episode 15, and I'm here with academic and researcher Robert West. Robert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be with you. So I'm what they call a professor emeritus in health psychology at University College London. Emeritus has nothing to do with merit. It has to do with the fact that I retired, but I'm still working. So they stopped paying me, but I still do stuff. That's what emeritus means. So, and I am attached to the Department of Behavioural Science and Health in the Institute of Epidemiology and Healthcare at University College London.
Brilliant. So I was going to say, what's your area of research currently? But it's kind of, you're retired. So obviously you're very passionate, or would it be fair to say you're very passionate about your work if you're still working and you're retired? So could you talk a little bit about that first?
Yeah, sure. I wouldn't, people do think I'm passionate because I sound passionate sometimes, but I'm not sure that I'm passionate, but I do care. And like a lot of academics, when you get to the end of the point, well, actually, I chose to retire. I could have carried on. But I wanted to focus my attentions on a few core projects, which meant taking the opportunity that I had to give up on my sort of more leadership commitments, which were taking a lot of time. So what I'm currently working on now are a number of projects, but one of them is a project that is led by my wife and academic partner, which is Professor Susan Michie, also at UCL. And this is a project called the Human Behaviour Change Project. And it's an incredibly ambitious project, but it will come off in some iteration, whether the first or second or third, who knows. But the idea is to use artificial intelligence and machine learning to automatically extract, using natural language processing, information from reports of behavior change intervention evaluations, and to use AI and machine learning to then predict what will happen in new scenarios. So whether you're developing an intervention or a policy, it will give you a sense from the literature of what to expect in a given population, in a given setting. And so the process will be largely automated, at least the sort of hard grind of that process, the data extraction and the basic prediction. And we're actually in the last year of the project, and we've been working with a number of universities and IBM Research, who are sort of leaders in natural language processing and machine learning, and computer science department. And so we're making some progress, but it's in the process, we're discovering an awful lot about how research is done and how it's reported, which has actually led me to my other main area, which I want to pursue, which is to create an AI system, online AI system, to support people in writing up their papers. Because what we found is that even with the best state-of-the-art natural language processing system, it's really hard and actually well-nigh impossible to extract key information from scientific papers, even in top journals, because very often the information's not there. If it is there, it's expressed in a way which makes it incredibly difficult to synthesize with information from other studies and so on. And so if we can start from the other end and get researchers to design and write up their studies using a system which makes it sort of machine friendly and human friendly, then we can do a big service to humankind.
Yeah, writing, even I've done literature reviews, they are a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare.
It's just, there's so much information. It's so hard to say. It comes down to kind of almost personal preference, or, the preference of your research advisor to say, which piece of information is more important or more relevant, and you end up cutting out a lot of stuff, and you're kind of like, I hope this is more relevant, what I'm keeping in.
Yeah, right. I mean, obviously there are guidelines, there's rules for systematic reviews and so on, and what we call meta-analyses to combine the data from different studies. But anyone who's done one of these things will know, A, how time-consuming it is, B, how frustrating it is trying to extract the information. Often it's not there, or often it's expressed in a way that you can't actually use. But also, you have to do it in an incredibly focused way. Does, for example, we're just doing a review at the moment, does mindfulness training help with people stopping smoking? Okay, well, there's different sorts of mindfulness training. There's not just one sort. And anyway, what people, as some people may be better suited to it than others. What other factors might be coming into play? For example, does it make a difference whether you're delivering it through an app or face-to-face or whatever? Now, you doing that kind of exercise by hand with a human doing it is incredibly time-consuming. And then you discover that there's something that you haven't quite got or you've missed, and you've got to do it all over again. It's very frustrating. But with this system, all the information would already be there, and it would be a very simple matter to extract it and then use it. So
sort of let AI do the legwork, in a sense. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. Let AI do the stuff that it's good at, and human intelligence, HI, do the stuff that we're good at. And so I was incredibly impressed. And your listeners, if they're at all interested in this, I highly recommend it. A book by Garry Kasparov, who was the world chess champion, called Deep Thinking. He in that book, he puts it really well because, of course, chess has become a really good example of the combination of artificial intelligence and human intelligence, because now all grandmasters would use computers in their preparation because it can do things and go through lines, tactical lines and so on at speed that would take them ages to do. And then they can do the sort of the more strategic stuff. And I think that's what we're going to see in the future in so many areas, that humans are good at strategic thinking, at flexibility, at putting stuff together, sort of sideways thinking. Computers are really good at number crunching, at extracting information and reasoning with it and doing stats and so on. So let's let the computer do that.
Yeah. Get rid of all the boring, monotonous stuff and let us focus on the exciting, more nuanced stuff. Yeah. What's the project that you're working on with Susan? What's the, I guess, overarching aim, or what would you hope to achieve with that big project?
With the Human Behaviour Change Project, we're using smoking cessation, stopping smoking, as the use case, because it's an area that has some very good research with clear outcomes, and it happens to be also the area that I've spent most of my career doing work in, so I know it quite well. What we're hoping by this time next year is that we will have a system that at least reasonably well can extract about 80 or so different types of information from reports, which is more than most systematic reviews would extract. Obviously the outcome, characteristics of the population, the characteristics of the intervention, what they included, and so on. To extract that information, feed it into a machine learning system. Actually, what we're working on at the moment is something which is quite state of the art, which is combining machine learning with what they call a semantic reasoning process. So machine learning on its own can do some fantastic things, but it can also go off on ludicrous tangents. And it also needs a huge amount of data to work with before it can start to deliver the goods. What in the old days artificial intelligence used to do is use semantic reasoning or logical reasoning. And that fell foul of the problem that with logic, you get what's known as a combinatorial explosion of inference. So once you've got a few propositions in your logic system, you can easily get to ludicrous numbers of propositions, most of which are of no interest at all. And so And so people sort of abandoned that a bit and went to machine learning. But what we're doing is we're sort of going halfway back and saying, well, we can use machine learning, but we can guide it with things that we know follow logically. So, for example, if we know to give you a simple example with smoking cessation, we know that if the longer you go from the quit date, the more likely you are to relapse. So if you see a bit of data which shows a higher quit rate later than early, you know there's something wrong, because you can't, logically, you can't be 6 months abstinent without also being 3 months abstinent. It's a very simple example, but there's loads of these sort of things that you can plug into the machine learning system to constrain its sort of search process. And that means that you can confine it into channels that give it much more accurate prediction. That's the theory. That's what we're working on at the moment. So I'm reasonably confident we'll do it. So we'll end up with a system that hopefully will be a sort of proof of principle in smoking cessation and actually physical activity as well, that people will then want to take forward. And we certainly plan to do that ourselves as well.
Great. Yeah, something I really like about your research is that you're very experienced and you've done lots of research, but it's very practical. It's a lot around health, really. So smoking cessation, you have an app as well, actually, which I saw. So smoking cessation, what are kind of like some of the rates currently of smokers around the world? And then what are some of the biggest things you've learned that, let's say, for example, someone knows a smoker or they are smoking themselves, that they could apply in their own lives? Yeah,
so there is a lot of research that's been done, and a lot of it hasn't been applied yet, although some of it has. So what's been happening globally with smoking rates is that they were going up pretty steadily for many decades, and now globally, probably the prevalence of smoking is fairly flat, might be coming down a little bit, but it's coming down reasonably fast in countries like the UK, the United States, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. Europe, it's not really, the rest of Europe, I should say, as a Brit, it's not really coming down, and they're not really, to be honest, doing much about it. And some countries in the world, it's going up. Countries like Russia, have very high smoking prevalence. China does, but although China, many countries in the world, smoking is very much a male thing, and the smoking rates among women are much, much lower. So, for example, in China, probably somewhere between 50 and 60% of men smoke, and about 3% of women. So that gives you an idea, of the difference. Now, what we're finding is, there are now a lot of things that you can do to support your quit attempt, if you make a quit attempt. And some of these are pharmaceutical products. One is called Champix or Chantix in the United States, which actually got a bit of a bad press, but mainly in the States, not so much elsewhere, because there were worries about psychiatric side effects of it. I was actually involved in a study. I should declare a conflict of interest here. I was working with Pfizer at that time, involved in a randomized trial to assess the safety of Chantix. And as a result of that study, the FDA removed what they call a black box warning, which was that they were, I think, rightly persuaded that although it looked as though there might be an issue with serious neuropsychiatric side effects, in fact, that probably wasn't the case. But there are side effects. Drugs all have side effects, and we always have to watch out for it. But that's one. But the one that and of course, there's things like e-cigarettes, which I know are very controversial in the United States. Funnily enough, not so much in countries like the UK, where, again, this is my opinion, I think the health authorities have got it about right in terms of making sure that you don't get youth uptake, which is the big worry in the United States, but at the same time making sure that smokers who decide that they want to stop smoking have this as a way of doing it, and it does help. So it's not a game change. It's not the game changer that a lot of people, I think, thought it might be, but it is another tool in the armory. In the United States, I think it's slightly different because the United States has a very different sort of, how would you say, sort of commercial atmosphere. And so in the States, you've had pretty shocking advertising, which is obviously aimed at children to get them to take up vaping. But that would completely banned in the United Kingdom. There's no chance of that sort of thing. And you see the difference that in the UK, really very few people, very few kids vape, and just about all the vapers are people who are smokers or ex-smokers. But anyway, the thing I wanted to say, which I think for me is the big one, is a drug called cytosine. It's Cytisine. And if you try and type it into Word, it'll try and convert it to cytosine, which is the amino acid. But cytisine is a plant alkaloid. And it was the very first smoking cessation drug ever licensed. And hardly anyone has ever heard of it. But it was produced in Bulgaria in the 1960s, and it comes from mainly from laburnum seeds. It's an extract from laburnum seeds, and laburnum seeds are actually poisonous. And the reason they're poisonous is because of cytosine, but that's because you're getting a massive dose of it. If you take cytosine in the sort of doses that are therapeutic, then it's a chemical that looks to the body a lot like nicotine, but it doesn't have the sort of rewarding, addictive properties of nicotine. And so what it does, rather like Chantix, in fact, very like Chantix, is it blocks the neuronal receptors so that nicotine can't get on them. It gives you enough activity in the brain pathways to reduce the craving for a cigarette, but without giving you any of the positive satisfaction of smoking at all. And so anyway, this drug has been around for donkey's years and is very, very popular. It's by far the most popular smoking cessation drug in countries like Poland, but most people in the world haven't heard of it. And I think its day will come because we did a randomized controlled trial, which we published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is one of the top medical journals, back in 2011, randomized placebo-controlled trial showing very clear effectiveness of cytosine in helping people to stop. Natalie Walker in New Zealand did another trial showing that it looked as though it was more effective than nicotine replacement therapy. And there's now quite a few trials out there showing that it's very clearly safe, it is effective, and this is the key. This is the key that I'm sort of leading up to. It's off patent, which means that any generic manufacturer could pick it up and run with it. And when we did our trial back in 2011, the cost of a full course of treatment was about €3, which is about $3. Full course of treatment at a time when other smoking cessation drugs were costing literally hundreds. So I see cytosine in the long term as kind of like the aspirin of smoking cessation. Actually, I may not have made that term up. I think I did, but it's possible that I've just forgotten who actually made it up. But it's a great term.
Yeah, credit where it's due. You've done the work already, so you're able to have a little bit of credit on a term like that. So smoking cessation, anyone who doesn't know and is listening, is just quitting smoking, basically, or stopping smoking. Yeah. So then, how could what you've learned in terms of let's just call it like habit change, stopping smoking, how would it carry over to like other kind of habits that people typically are trying to stop? So what are some habits that people are commonly trying to change? And then what are some typical changes they can make that are kind of like across the board effective approaches, if there are any, because I know every habit, it can be individual.
Yeah, every habit is individual, but there are some broad principles as well, and I think probably the single most important broad principle is understanding this age-old meme, as it were, before there were memes, that the human our brains essentially come in two parts. They come in the part which evolved many millions of years ago, what you might call the animal brain. Some people call it the lizard brain. I think it's better than a lizard brain. I think it's got more going for it than a lizard. But let's say the animal brain. This is our emotions, our drives, our habits, our instincts, and all that kind of stuff. And then the human brain, which is the clever part, the part that talks to us, and we talk to it, and the part that plans, and the part that says, I really should stop smoking, or I should cut down on my alcohol intake, or I should do more exercise, whatever it is. But the key insight there is that the human brain doesn't get to control our behavior directly. It has to work through the animal brain. So it's not enough for a person to just come up with the idea, I should do this. It's got to turn into the feeling, I want to do this, or I need to do this. And the trick in behavior change and self-regulation is how in every crucial moment, when you're being offered a drink, or when you see a very tasty snack, or you're thinking about having second helpings, or you're in bed and you're thinking whether you should go out for a run, at that moment, you've got to find ways in which the human brain can communicate through the animal brain into influencing your behavior. And one way that is often talked about for doing that is like strengthening the rider and taming the horse. So you just think of us as a horse and a rider, and our animal brain is the horse, and the human brain is the animal brain is the horse, and the human brain is the rider. And the human brain can't tell the horse what to do, but it has to work through the horse to get this thing done. And of course, now we know that there are many ways of doing that. So taming the horse, for example, I talked about cytosine and varenicline. Those drugs, they're like appetite suppressants for nicotine hunger. They take down that drive to smoke that the person experiences. But on its own, that wouldn't be enough. You can't just give someone varenicline or Champix or Chantix or cytosine and think, oh, well, they're going to stop smoking. That doesn't happen. That's just one side of the equation. You've got to sort of be bearing down with the clever part of the brain, the human brain, on that process as well. So strengthening the rider and taming the horse is the key proposition here in self-regulation. How are you going to get yourself to do things that you set out to do and you want to do? On the strengthening the rider part of it, there's now quite a decent amount of research showing that if you form really specific if-then plans that are so specific that when the moment comes that you could go off the rails, or you do the thing that you said you weren't going to do, you remember the plan and you know exactly what it is you have to do to implement that plan, then you're more likely to succeed. Vague plans are hopeless. Vague plan, I'm going to try not to drink too much. I'm going to try to do more exercise. That's not going to get you anywhere. Specific if-then plans. In the jargon, in health psychology, they're called implementation intentions. But they're basically specific if-then plans. And so what you're trying to do is anticipate those moments when you're going to be tempted to do something, or you're going to fail to do something that you set out to do. That's one example. One that I think is tremendously important, and if you can do it, is for me almost like the atom bomb of behavior change. And it's the atom bomb of behavior change, because if you can do it, it's massive. It really is a very powerful tool, weapon even, but it's really hard. Fortunately, atom bombs are hard to make. Otherwise, the world would probably have been blown up several times over by now. And this is identity change, identity. And our identities are incredibly powerful drivers of our behavior for good and ill. If you think about people who do incredible feats of endurance or self-sacrifice, then a lot of this is being driven by who they are, who they see themselves, their core, their being, whether it's spiritual or religious or humanist or whatever it might be. And by the same token, you also see that going the other way with suicide bombers or people who do terrible things that go against what you might imagine to be all human nature, and yet somehow it's happened. So those are extreme cases. But what you see in other areas of behavior change is this incredible process of identity change. For example, people who get into trouble with illicit drugs and become drug addicts. Very often, what you see when they come out of it is something flips, something switches in their heads. This is not who I am anymore. And quite often, the identity shifts from being a drug user to being someone who wants to help other drug users to recover from their drug use. So, I do a lot of exercise. I play tennis now. I used to play a lot of squash. My identity was very much, and still is very much, as someone who is fit and looks after my body. I'm not overweight or something. That's really important to me. So if I start to sort of slide in terms of my weight or something like that, then my identity as being a certain kind of person is an important factor in bringing me back to what I want to be. So if then rules, identity is really important. Other things that are often really important is surrounding yourself with the right cues, the right environment. Our behavior is really very strongly environmentally conditioned, social environment and physical environment. So if you can create an environment which is conducive to the sorts of behaviors that you're trying to achieve, then that will also help. Those are three examples.
Oh, very, very good. So just going back to your very first one, when someone says, I would like to exercise more, I'd like to lose weight, why is that so ineffective? And then why is it so effective when someone says, if I wake up in the morning, then I'll go for a walk, or if it's lunchtime, I will eat some vegetables and protein? Why is there such a discrepancy between the two in terms of effect?
The discrepancy arises from the fact that all behavior occurs in the moment and is caused by whatever was happening the immediately preceding second or few seconds. Okay, so if I say now, sitting here, or if I'm with a counselor or a health coach, that I'm going to do more exercise. That's that moment. That's not the moment when the exercise needs to occur. You need to be in the right state of mind at that moment in order for the thing to occur. So generally saying I'm thinking of doing this is not going to be enough. So what you're trying to do is to set yourself up into a situation where it's not even a choice. Ideally, it's not, you've already made the choice. This is going to happen. So another way of thinking about it, it's a bit like even really heavy smokers go into a supermarket. They're not going to smoke. And what you find is that really heavy smokers in a supermarket don't even want to smoke. The environment's not conducive to smoking. They don't smoke in supermarkets. You don't do that. So the environment is conditioning their desires and so on. So your job in self-control is to condition your desires at the moment in which those can come into effect. So you set a routine, you set a plan. You say, okay, with your health coach, you might say, right, if I want to go for let's say a 20-minute run, then when can I do that? Where is there in my week that I can achieve that? And you say, okay, can you do that every week? Is that something that you can commit to on a regular basis, or 3 times a week, or whatever it might be? And then you make the plan, and then you cement the plan so that that is a thing that you do. And one of the things that, as you know, I'm sure, is that health coaches can do, on top of giving you sort of a good advice on exactly how to do it, is what health coaches do is they also add that very important extra ingredient of accountability. If it's just you and you're in bed and you're thinking, oh, shall I get up and do this thing? Nah, I don't think I'll bother. But if they're going to come and see you, or if they're going to have to report back to you and say what they did, then it's just another potentially important motivator at that precise moment. So accountability can come in. But so that's the key, really. It's all about understanding how important and how our behavior and our desires are always in the moment.
Brilliant, yeah. So in terms of identity, the second point then, I've heard a lot about how the narrative we tell ourselves is very important. And like, you know, we need to think of ourselves as a central character in our own movie of life, really. So like, why is it so important to like follow through on what we say? What happens when we don't follow through on an intention, and when we do, what's going on there exactly?
Yeah. So, it's also worth bearing in mind that we all slip, right? We even when we've got everything sorted out and we've done everything right, there will be occasions in which we slip, and we have to be able to cope with those situations. So, actually, the sort of metaphor that I use is our rules and our identity have to be like a self-sealing tire. That so you could be like a balloon, which a balloon is, it's good because in the sense that it keeps the outside out and the inside in. But if you have one little puncture, it goes. So that's no use. On the other hand, you could have it like a leaky tire, in which it just gradually deflates. You have the odd cigarette here and there, or you don't go for the run, or you don't do the thing you say you were going to do, and then the whole thing just falls flat in the end. What you want is a situation where you've got a very clear boundary between what your rule is and following your identity and your principles and your rules, and not. But if, as will happen, there's a puncture, then it will close up. You know how to deal with it. Your tire will close up, and you'll be able to carry on. So you have to be prepared with ways of handling that. And one of the famous sort of psychological principles that people have operated on over the decades is called the abstinence violation effect, which also works the other way in terms of not doing something that you said you were going to do. And this was Alan Marlatt, famous psychologist, and he said his proposition, which is right, you see it all the time, is that once people have sort of lapsed, then they go, oh, this is no good. I might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb, as people say. So, and it all goes to hell in a handcart. Their confidence goes and so on. So, and you need to be able to have ways of dealing with that and reasserting. And that's where, in my opinion, things like ACT or ACT come in, which is about recommitment. So acceptance and recommitment therapy, a really important part of that is recognizing that commitment and recommitment are going to be an important part of this journey in the process. So the identity is sort of your identity and your rules that you operate by, your principles, who you are, what matters to you. This is kind of like your umbrella that's shielding you and giving you also, mixing my metaphors, a sense of direction. But you also need to be able to operate at a more micro level, a more granular level, with specific scenarios, situations, and how you cope.
That's interesting, because I'm learning about self-compassion right now, and then ACT is something I'll be learning about as well. And I've recently heard about the term related to addiction of the relapse scenario. How do you define that again?
Well, there's the abstinence violation effect. Yeah. Yeah. So, and this is, as we see so often, where a lapse turns into sort of full relapse, often quite quickly, but sometimes more slowly. But it's in the smoking cessation, it's one of the reasons why we always try and get people to start a quit attempt with what we call the not a puff rule. That is the idea that, once you've committed, once you've said, this is it, this is my quit date, you just move heaven and earth to avoid having that puff on a cigarette, because we know how dangerous that puff can be.
Yeah. So I think that's a very common human experience, where because you break the rule in your head, you're like, oh, it's all for nothing, and you completely go the opposite way, and you might say I'm eating healthy, and then you have that one slice of cake and you end up having 3 or 4 or whatever. So something I found with being like disciplined and following, your kind of your values and your own rules, I feel as though you become I become very rigid, and I become inflexible. And something, the more I get older, is I value being flexible, because life is dynamic. You need to adapt. The person, I think, who is the most, how will I say, effective person is like a Swiss Army knife in a sense. So how do you avoid setting a rule like, I'm going to quit smoking and I'm going to, be healthier, but then also not becoming like, I don't know, and addicted to potentially, addicted to exercise? How do you combat against that and remain flexible if it's important?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And we do need to be flexible in our lives, and we also need to give ourselves a break. We need treats. We all need treats. Give yourself treats. People should have treats. They make life fun. I wouldn't want to paint a picture of someone's life as a sort of some Victorian sort of stuffed shirt, because that's no fun at all. At least I guess it probably wasn't. I think here it's really understanding when you need these rules and when you can be more flexible. And when it comes to things like smoking, then it turns out you do need these rules. It's just, and when smokers sort of say to me, "Oh, that doesn't seem very fair," I say, I know it's not fair. It just is what it is. So life is what it is. But for other things, then you can be more flexible. So it just depends on what it is you're trying to achieve, but it's about knowing what your rules are, what your principles are, what your boundaries are, and you can even extend that, I think, into other areas. For example, of your moral behavior. We talk about this thing called a moral compass, and we know that some people have a very strong moral compass. So in a situation in which other people are doing something which everyone really knows is wrong, someone with a moral compass will say, "No, I'm not going to do that. That's wrong," and they won't go along with the crowd. And and actually you see that cultures build up, and there's lots of examples over history, recent history, of famous people who've done terrible things, but actually in the context in which they were operating, they didn't think it was all that bad. I mean, they knew it was wrong, and everyone knew it was wrong, but the culture was such that you needed a moral compass in order to stop yourself doing it, or to call out other people who are doing it. And so I think we do need these rules, and we do need these boundaries, and it's really good as someone with agency to recognize, we are people with agency and responsibility, and we can enact that up to a point. There's not a sort of rigid set of rules you can use for all of this, but there are principles that you can operate.
yeah, you can, I guess, decide on how you want to be. In a sense, you can set out like, but it's going to be a lot of trial and error, of course. But I think, yeah, deciding for yourself, what you want to value, as opposed to like, I guess, the very powerful marketing around smoking, and other products guiding you, and you're just kind of like a leaf in the wind almost.
Yeah, you don't want to be a leaf in the wind. you want to be who you have decided that you want to be.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the key thing, deciding who you want to be. So the combi model, is this your model? And could you explain it a little bit, and then how it ties into what we're talking about in terms of habit change?
Sure. So the combi model, this was a model that Susan Michie and I developed as part of a larger project to help policymakers and people working with behavior change to apply a set of principles from the research that people have done to developing effective interventions. And the combi model is actually just a sort of modern version, again, of a very well understood principle. It's actually even built into the justice system in countries like the US and the UK. And if I start with the justice system, if you want to, and I'm a big fan of Perry Mason and all these courtroom dramas and detective stories. I love Columbo, for example. It's a brilliant, brilliant program. Anyway, if you want to prove someone guilty of a crime, most people who watch TV will know that you have to prove means, capability, and motive. Means, opportunity, and motive, right? Well, that's because they had to have been able to do the crime. If they weren't, they weren't even at the scene and had no access to the crime scene, then they probably, couldn't have done it. They needed to have the wherewithal to do it, kind of capacity to do it, and they needed to have the motive. So COM-B is just taking that basic principle and saying, okay, for any of us to do anything at any time, you sitting here now and me sitting here now, we have to have three things in place. We have to be able to do it in terms of the capability. We have to have the knowledge, the skills, the physique. We have to, something about us, the perceptual apparatus, all the rest of it. We have to be able to do it, the capability. If we don't have that, it doesn't matter what else is present, the behavior can't occur. We have to have the opportunity. For example, if you take a trivial example, in order to ride a bike, you have to have a bike. So you need to have the space, you need to have the physical environment, you need to have the social environment to enable the behavior to occur. Otherwise, it simply can't occur. You need to have the resources, the money, whatever it might be. So that's the opportunity. And then last, but certainly not least, you have to have the motivation. And that's a little different because it's not just having the motivation to do it. You have to be more motivated to do this behavior than any of the other competing behaviors that are there at that time. So you have the capability, you have to have the opportunity, and you have to be more motivated to do this thing than anything else. And that ultimately dictates what all of us do all the time. So that is the fundamental sort of law of behavior, as it were. And so if you're trying to change your own behavior or help someone else to change their behavior, what you need to do is to figure out what will it take in order for this behavior to occur at the relevant moment. And over the course of certainly my career, Susan had the same experience, what you often find is that people who are developing interventions make assumptions. They say, oh, it must be capability or it must be motivation. For example, I used to do quite a lot of research into traffic accidents, and there was the Department of Transport in the UK was very interested in why young drivers, particularly male drivers, inexperienced drivers, were crashing their cars so often. And it is still the case, by the way, that in the UK, and I'm sure it's true in the United States, because your accident record is no better than ours. They're both quite good on a world stage. But anyway, there's a greater than 50% chance that a novice driver is going to crash their car in the first year of driving. And that's why insurance rates are quite high. is because you're probably going to crash your car. Probably as a minor, incident, but it could still be expensive. Anyway, the assumption was on the part of the Department of Transport that the problem was a lack of skill because they'd only just learned to drive. And so we investigated that, and we investigated other factors as well. And what we found was actually, if anything, it was the more skillful novice drivers who are the ones who are more likely to crash their cars. And it wasn't really a matter of lack of skill, it was motivation. It was because they had they imported from their lives, from their general demeanor, their whole attitude to life, a kind of carelessness or recklessness. It wasn't even kind of, they were wanting to be reckless or thrill-seeking. It was just a sense of not caring enough, not being, not really paying attention to the safety issues. And so they'd be driving too fast, they'd be driving too close to the car in front, they'd be leaving too small a gap, all of these things that put people at risk of accidents. So the assumption was wrong. It wasn't capability, it was motivation. And so rather than investing money in advanced driver training for these people, which was a big waste of money, then what we needed to do is to deal with the motivational side. And if we can't deal with that, then let's just make cars and roads safer and sort of engineer the accident or the injury out of the system. So you use COMBI to say, what will it take? What do I need to do to get this behavior to change? Is it capability, opportunity, or motivation, or some combination? And then you figure out how you're going to change that.
Great. So we talked about how important identity is. How can you combine identity and motivation? Because from what I gather, well, it's a fact at this stage, but in my work as a health coach, the disease of obesity is not a lack of willpower. It's much more complicated than that, and that's the usual assumption. And again, we're talking about assumptions. So, how can someone combine identity and motivation to more effectively change their behavior?
Yeah. So identity is a really important source of motivation. It's kind of it's a wellspring of wants and needs. Now, as I say, if you could do it with a client to help them to change from an identity of someone who is struggling with their weight, who keeps trying things and failing, to someone whose identity has a set of rules around it about eating behaviors, for example, and those were so deeply entrenched into their identity that they just simply wouldn't break them. No, they wouldn't break them any more than they would go out and shoot someone. It's or steal from a shop or something like that. You just wouldn't do it. So if you think about identity as something that potentially has that level of power, then you are at least halfway there to getting the behavior changed. The tricky thing is how would you achieve that? And sometimes identity changes with a kind of road to Damascus experience, a sort of aha moment, a sudden shift, and they go, and it's incredible. People go from one thing to another, and that's great when that can happen. I mean, it's very hard to predict. It's like predicting an earthquake. There's a lot of stuff probably going on under the surface before that happened, and then something imperceptible happened, and it was the final straw that got them to do it. Very often, identity changes more gradually. You build confidence, and as you will know, one of the principles is the idea of baby steps. Is the idea of building on success, not on failure. So whatever targets are being set, those targets are being set to be achieved, not to be failed. And then you see how it goes. And I think also people have to feel good. I mean, the whole purpose of all of this is that people are happy and contented and feel satisfied, fulfilled lives. if life is just a chore, it's just a miserable sequence of failures, this is not good. So a lot of what one's trying to do in these behavior, this sort of behavior change, is create a sense in which this is actually good. I'm enjoying. They come back to see you because they want to, because they're getting something out of it. And yes, their progress might be slower, but it is progress, and their life is not being put on hold in the process. So there are many different sort of trajectories to changes in identity. Very gradual, very sudden, instantaneous, and sometimes it goes back, and sometimes it goes forward. And you take side routes, and sometimes you end up in cul-de-sacs. But as we were kind of alluding to a bit earlier, if you always start from where you are and think, okay, this is where I am. I may have just smoked a cigarette, I may have just eaten a bun, whatever it might be, or I may have been, on the wagon for 3 months. Wherever you are right now, it's always about thinking forward. What's the best I can do going forward, not what have I failed to achieve in the past?
Brilliant. Yeah. It's like give yourself that bit of grace, be a bit self-compassionate, and not, I guess, kind of flog it. We're talking a lot about animals here, but don't flog the dead horse, like just let that mistake or, that habit that you align with, just leave it be and focus on moving forward. Yeah.
It's okay. I think I think a lot of us need to be more compassionate to ourselves. Some people need to be less compassionate. I could think of a few politicians who could do with being a little harder on themselves. But most people really could do with being a bit more compassionate. And they could say, look, it's okay. It's okay. Whatever, this is where I am. What do I want going forward out of the situation, and how can I best achieve it?
Yeah. I feel as though you're talking a lot about mindfulness as well, because if you're not really slowing down and you're kind of caught up in a sort of like almost like a habit loop, and you're not thinking about what you're doing, then you can easily go off track and not really change the behavior how you'd like to. So something I'm just thinking about is like identity is very important. It's a big motivator. So do you think there's like people have a lack of identity with like less religion nowadays, is like it's not as common, and where kind of like society is very segregated, and it's all like as though I feel as though large companies like social media and these kind of things are like pitting us against each other. Do you feel as though that could be a cause of why something like obesity is on the rise, or is it something much more complicated than a simple answer like that?
I think that I don't think there's any less of this sort of identity. I don't think we think about ourselves less. If anything, I suspect that nowadays people think about themselves and image themselves more, because certainly when I was growing up, most people probably wouldn't hear their own voice recorded. They wouldn't hear their voice come back to them. And when people used to say, "Oh, I hate the sound of my own voice when I hear it recorded." Now, even young kids are used to hearing the sound of their voice. They're used to seeing themselves in videos. I mean, that was another thing. So I think that in some sense we are more inward looking, or at least we're more self-reflective, at least in a superficial way than we were. I'm not sure that there is less identity around spirituality or humanity or things outside themselves than there was. I think that maybe the focus is moving on to different things, climate change, for example, or identities in relation to one's racial group or sexual orientation or whatever. So I think there's probably more of that. And the risk there potentially with all of these different identities is that they can become fractured and not necessarily have a coherence. The thing about very often a religious identity is it includes a moral code. It's a lot of stuff that's sort of wrapped up in a religious identity. Some of it good, some of it not so good. But it's more, if you look at Islam, for example, it is not just a religion; it's also very much a moral code around how you treat other people. I think if we, to the extent that we become more secular, there's a risk that maybe we become more identified with certain issues like saving the planet or whatever it might be. I don't know. That's speculation, but how far these things would be contributing to health issues, I'm not sure. I think that with the obesity epidemic, I think that if you look at the trajectory of it and how where it sort of, when it really took off, I think you can, in different countries, I think you can see a lot of it was very much environmentally conditioned. The problem is with humans, of course, is that for most of our evolution, our animal brain and the early part of our human brain was brought up in food scarcity. So hunger is there to get us to eat, but also so is enjoying food and the pleasure of eating food. And as food becomes more palatable for our animal brain, more sugars, more fats, and so on, the calorie density of foods is higher. The opportunity to eat high calorie dense foods and feel fulfilled in a tasty meal is greater. Then it's really putting a bit of a strain on the clever part of our brain to sort of say, well, hold your horses here. You seem to have now had to, change from a 34 waist to a 36 waist. Is that what you want? So, and then you put on top of that a society in which everyone else seems to be like that as well. I mean, if you go to France, there's far less obesity, obviously, than there is in the United States, or and Ireland ditto, and the UK ditto. If you go to particularly some parts of the United States, then the average person is overweight, and so you're a bit kind of weird if you're thin. In fact, I remember going to where was it? It was Dallas actually, and someone actually commented that I was, to me, that I was skinny, and I'm not skinny. I'm actually just a sort of normal weight. So you've got a whole range of facts all feeding on themselves, and you've got industries whose job it is to make as much profit as possible for their shareholders, because that's their job, and that means getting people to eat as much high calorie foods as possible. If what they do is produce high calorie foods, so I think that a lot of it is around the difficulty that our animal brain has in coping with the environment in which we found ourselves, or we've created for ourselves.
Yeah, it's scary to think that the environment plays such a role, and then so many people are so unaware of the impact it has. And something I want to go back to in a second is addiction, because I know it's something you've done a lot of work in. But I'm just thinking of a company like McDonald's, or any company that's good with behavior change, like TikTok. These kind of companies that are very powerful and very wealthy. I imagine that a college like yours has a certain amount of resources. They're trying to do research for the good of humanity. And then I imagine on the opposing side, which isn't the case, but that's just how I look at it, is that McDonald's has its own team of scientists who are doing their own research. How are these companies so effective at sort of just having their way with people? Do they have their own research teams? Where do these people come from who are so effective? Is it like someone like you who just decided, I'm much more interested in money, and they transitioned over from working for a college to McDonald's, or how does that come about that they're so effective?
Yeah, well, they got a lot, as you say. The thing is, they're pushing at an open door. That they're working with our animal brain, and they're figure that it's not that hard, to be honest, to because the animal brain isn't that clever to produce products that tap into it. And obviously the tobacco industry does this par excellence. It's just fantastic for it. It's got this chemical nicotine that attaches itself to receptors in the brain and gets people to want to take nicotine in that form. And and it's not massively hard to then to build a really successful business on that basis. I think, and you raise, I think, a really interesting question for me as to why knowing what we know. I mean, let's leave McDonald's aside for a minute, because it's a food company and people like food and so on, and people enjoy hamburgers and so on. But if we take the tobacco industry, where most people who smoke, the vast majority of people smoke, wish they'd never started. Most people who smoke don't enjoy it. They're spending a lot of money on something that's killing them. So the question is, you're thinking about a career choice. You've just left university. Now, where shall I go and work? Oh, I know, I'll go and work for the tobacco industry. That'll be a good career choice. Who's doing that? Who are these people? And it seems bizarre. And yet, clearly, people do. And obviously, the money is a big factor. I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier about moral compass. I think that there are ways in which, without a very strong moral compass, any of us can justify just about anything that we do. We can say, oh, well, smokers choose to smoke, or I'm going to go into that part of the tobacco industry which is about trying to reduce the harmfulness of my product, or the product. So I'm trying to do good. We're great at making excuses for ourselves, and especially when the money's very good. So I think it may not even be a sort of us and them thing. I mean, I have to own up to the fact that when I graduated, actually, I'm probably quite a good example here. When I graduated university, I went into the civil service in the UK. I was put into the Ministry of Defence, and my first job was arms sales, right? So that was not something that I would have wanted to do. And I wanted to be a civil servant and to be helping with policy, and I'd have quite liked to go into health, but I was put into the Ministry of Defence. Anyway, I didn't immediately then say, right, that's it, I quit. I'm not going into the Ministry of Defence to sell arms. I was given a job to do, and I tried to do it as best as I could. And I guess that's what happens to people. I mean, I did leave, obviously, ultimately, quite after a couple of years. But, in another life or in another situation, maybe I would have carried on. I don't know. So I think we don't want to be too hard on people for making choices in the situations in which they find themselves that then end up being bad. The only real defense against that, I think, ultimately, is a strong moral compass. No.
Yeah, being clear on your values, and I feel as though you're showing your honesty by declaring like your conflict of interest and your job you had previously. So yeah, I guess it comes back to what we said already about like deciding who you want to be, and then just making the best decisions you can from there, giving yourself grace as well. So I know addiction is like a huge topic. We could do a whole conversation about that. I guess something I want to ask you specifically is you had a YouTube video with I think it was your son, and you're talking about para addictions. So could you just talk about like how to know, I guess, when you may need to start thinking about, okay, is this some habit that I'm addicted to? And then what's a para addiction as well?
Yeah, so having been editor-in-chief of the journal Addiction for over a decade, it has been an important part of my research life. And one of the things that it occupies your mind as someone working in the field of addiction is, in fact, trying to figure out what addiction is. And different people have different views. And I have different views from actually other people who worked on the journal. Because it's a multifaceted thing, but at the end of it, well, let me go back. Decades ago, addiction was actually relatively straightforward in terms of how it was viewed. It was viewed as something like this: you would start to take a drug, because drug addiction was the only thing that was considered to be an addiction. You'd start to take a drug for enjoyment or kicks or whatever it might be. And then over time, you would develop physiological tolerance to the effects of the drug. So you need to take more and more and more of the drug in order to get the high that you're seeking. And as your body is adjusting to the presence of the drug, that means that if you don't have the drug, your body goes into a sort of withdrawal syndrome where you get DTs, or if you're alcoholic, or the cold turkey, the sort of goosebumps and things, flu symptoms. You really feel really bad if you can't get hold of your drug. And so now you go from wanting the drug because it gives you a high to needing the drug just to survive, just to stay normal, and actually literally to survive, because some drug withdrawal is actually fatal. And that was how they viewed addiction. And what we realized after a bit was that that's not it at all. If it was that, if drug addiction or addiction was just that, it would actually be really easy to cure people. All you need to do is to get people into a hospital, give them some medication, help them, ease them through the withdrawal symptoms until they come out the other end. Out they come the other end, cured. Thank you very much. And that's not what happens. It would also be the case that the severity of the withdrawal symptoms would predict relapse, and it doesn't. So what is going on with drug addiction? And then why is it that people also seem to get addicted to other things like gambling? And so we sort of turn things around a bit and now understand addiction as a whole range of different mechanisms that all have one final common thing in common, final common pathway, as we call it. And that is that the person who is addicted experiences, for whatever reason, a repeated powerful motivation to engage in the behavior. And that is a chronic thing. It just lasts, a long time. And it may be the withdrawal symptoms are contributing to that. I mean, they definitely do in some cases. It may be that there's something else completely that's contributing to it. And smoking is a rather complex case because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. But what it means is that if you focus on it's this powerful motivation that's at the heart of addiction. The other side of it is that, and this is where not everyone agrees, is that it's to do something which is ultimately harmful or could be harmful. And the reason why I think that's important is because if it wasn't for that, why would we care? If you're doing something that has no particularly harmful consequences, who cares? Knock yourself out, do it. It's great. If you bring the harm part of it in, you've got to think, well, okay, how much harm? Is it just sort of slight inconvenience? Is it just costing you a bit of money? Was it ruining your life? Is it killing you? And that's where we come to the understanding of addiction as something that has to sort of pass some threshold, both in terms of the powerful, the strength of the motivation, how much of a grip has it got on your life, and how much harm could that be doing you? So we now accept that cigarette smoking is addictive because it creates very powerful urges to smoke, and it kills half the people who do it and don't manage to stop. So that is pretty harmful. That's definitely in. Heroin addiction, as we know, or opiate addiction, that's definitely in. Gambling addiction, in my opinion, and most of the people I work with, that's definitely in, because gambling ruins lives. It totally destroys a lot of people's lives. Clearly, as with smoking, as with heroin, as with gambling, there are people who don't become addicted. There are people who can do it and they can take it or leave it. Fantastic, good for them. Same with alcohol. Most people who drink aren't alcoholics, but there are people who become addicted. So where does that leave behaviors like going onto the internet or using Facebook or TikTok or playing adventure games or horse riding or whatever it might be? This is where you've got something which is you'd say, yeah, it's certainly got a bit of a grip on you. You know, you're spending a lot of time doing it. You may not even be enjoying it. You may be doing it because of a compulsion, you know, that it has created for itself because of the way the brain works, which is something I was discussing with my son Jamie in that podcast. That, you know, crucially, an important insight is to understand that things that are rewarding, in quotes, don't have to be pleasurable. They can be rewarding without being pleasurable. And so because what they tap into is a part of your brain that creates an urge to do that thing without you even feeling any positive satisfaction for it. So yeah, a lot of the time you can find yourself compelled to do things, or it feels like it. And it could be quite harmful. You know, it could mean that you don't get your homework done, or it could mean that you're not as effective at your job as you might otherwise be. But are we going to call that addiction? Because if you do that, it kind of lets, this is the thing really, it kind of lets the tobacco industry, the alcohol industry, the gambling industry, you know, the drug cartels a little bit off the hook, because they're sort of saying, well, you know, yeah, okay, tobacco is addictive, but then so is going on TikTok, so is butter, you know. You think, well, actually, you know, there's a massive difference between smoking and going on TikTok. You know, very few people die from going on TikTok. Literally 7 million people a year die from smoking. So the idea of the para addiction is it's like it's got a lot of the qualities of addiction. There's, you know, strong motivation to do it. There's a degree of harm, but it doesn't reach that threshold that we would say, actually, you know what, this is an addiction. This needs treating. This needs us to have extensive, comprehensive public health measures to combat it. Now, that's not to say that, you know, there aren't people who are so deeply embedded in TikTok or so deeply embedded in Facebook or various other behaviors that it's not ruining their lives and they wouldn't benefit from treatment. And I think in those situations, they should receive treatment and support and help with it. But by and large, that behavior doesn't have those qualities. So that was where we were bringing in this idea of well, what should we call these things? They're kind of like addiction, but they're not kind of, you know, they don't fully qualify.
Yeah, the compulsions almost, it sounds like. So yeah, they have, like, on a spectrum, they have a negative maybe outcome over the long term, but they don't have an obvious negative outcome such as gambling or alcohol or smoking.
Yeah. Right.
Brilliant. Robert, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that we didn't go over, anything you'd like to direct people to or mention?
Oh, well, since you ask. So it was a couple of years ago now, Jamie, my son Jamie, who you mentioned, and I wrote a book called Energize, The Secrets of Motivation, a very short book, which is available in all good bookshops and Amazon and so on. And it's written as a dialogue between Jamie and me. So Jamie's taking the sort of the perspective of the reader. And this was Jamie's idea, actually. He'd seen that John Cleese had done this in a book on depression, which he found really worked. And it does work in this sort of area because people come to books like this with so many preconceptions that it's really hard as an author to sort of deal with these just by, you know, boring paragraphs. So Jamie asks the question that the reader might be asking, might be thinking of asking. So anyway, that book is out. And we're just about to publish in the next couple of months a sequel, which is specifically about the animal brain. It's called React, Harness the Power of the Animal Brain. So that'll be out soon. And both of them are on, they'll be able to get them from Amazon, but the publisher's Silverback.
Brilliant. Yeah. That just reminds me of a book I read, and it's like a dialogue as well. And I have read that book twice and I plan to read it again. So I really enjoy that style. So I'll definitely include that in the links in the info for the podcast. So this has been great. Thank you very much for your time, Robert.
Thank you.